There are lots of reasons to hire people with disabilities. A lot of studies have showed people with developmental disabilities tend to stay on the job many, many times longer than other individuals. They tend to like where they are. They aren't necessarily people who are ladder climbers and want to chase a dollar. Sometimes that's the case, we all want money. But we see less of that with the population of people with developmental disabilities. And if you talk to employers, they would say the hardest thing they do is trying to find and keep good staff. So for them to know up front that if you hire a person with a developmental disability, the odds of them staying and doing well at this job for a much longer period than you're used to is really great. And that's tremendous to think about for our employers who are dealing with sometimes low-wage employees, our baristas, our grocery store workers, our custodians and folks like that who really have a lot of trouble sticking in those jobs, which is something that I think is just tremendous as an attribute to people with disabilities. And also all the time I get calls from parents saying, will the employer be scared to do this? And I can't answer that, right? All kinds of people are scared of all kinds of things just because they're new and different, not because you don't want to do them. So I think part of that, breaking down that fear, is this IDEA generation coming forward, people being used to seeing people with disabilities working in other environments. If you're an employer and the bakery you go to every day hires 3 people with developmental disabilities, a light bulb should be going off for you saying, this seems like a great untapped resource for me. So I'm hoping that this is kind of a snowball effect where the more people we see out in communities and out in viable jobs, the more we'll see employers warming up to the idea and not feeling like they have to break new ground. We have really tremendous track records behind us. The federal government has done a lot, particularly under past President Obama, to try and promote hiring of people with disabilities. A few years ago, the National Governors Association put hiring of people with disabilities as their #1 priority, so there's more and more focus being given to this issue. In 2012, Virginia entered a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice, and one of the biggest pieces of that settlement agreement was pushing employment options for people with disabilities and trying to move away from this idea and this kind of old wives' tale that people with disabilities couldn't work or didn't want to work. And so all of the big overarching factors I think are pushing us in the right direction, and now we're waiting for all of our individuals to grow up and graduate school and go and push forward for these things, and our service providers to be ready to go out and meet with them. In Virginia, I think we have a challenge in that we have been slow to adapt the employment model to people with disabilities relative to some other states. And so our support providers who are used to serving people with developmental disabilities are maybe not the best job developers. That's a whole different skill set, to know how to go out and talk to an employer or cold call an employer and make a pitch for why doing something totally different with their business model makes sense, and maybe even asking them to make an accommodation, not so much a physical accommodation, but sometimes, you have this job, are you willing to take apart this 10% of the job that this person can't do and maybe redistribute it to someone else, because this 90% of the job, they would rock it. And if you think about it, I think a lot of employers would be thrilled to have employees who did 90% of their job really, really well and told you what their shortcomings were and let you accommodate them. But it's a different way of thinking, right? And just getting used to the idea that this is the same as any other employee. When you hire anyone off the street, you don't know. You take your best guess. You meet them. You look at job skills and resume and background, and you get a sense of, are you the right fit for the job? And as someone who's hired people in the past, sometimes you get it really wrong. It has nothing to do with whether or not someone has a disability. So I think the more employers do that, that kind of fear gets broken down.